What do you know about worldviews? How do you imagine that philosophies that someone who is long dead propounded could be influencing your life at this point? Why do we behave the way we behave? Do we actually have a way to track where those structures that power those behaviors, where they came from? In this edition, I will be speaking about worldviews, speaking about philosophies and the way we behave as people, and how there is a theology for every aspect of human life. Welcome. Thank you. Hello, welcome once again, and it's my joy to have you actually, jump on this session. Today, I want to actually talk about something very important. But before I talk about the title, let me start with a story. Years back, I saw a documentary, and then there was a young woman who was asked a question. She was on the campus, a university campus in the United States of America, and she was asked a question. Oh, if you saw your dog drowning in a swimming pool and you saw your neighbor drowning as well at the same time, who would you save first? And she said, my dog, of course. Now, if you were shocked like I was shocked, then I think, right, you're human in that sense of the word. What would make a lady, a human being, choose to save a dog first before a neighbor? It is worldviews. And so I'll be speaking about worldviews. I'll be speaking about worldviews, philosophies, and behavior, why we behave the way we behave. The very interesting thing that you must realize is that you are a compendium of definitions. You're a compendium of belief systems, of worldviews. And interestingly, the fact that you live with a certain worldview does not mean you intentionally embraced the worldview. That's why one of the first things I counsel people to do is to audit their lives, is to audit their belief systems, is to actually take apart every part of their lives and kind of audit them. I've been thinking a lot around the Christian faith and how worldviews are very important. The fact that a person is a Christian, the fact that a person is a Christian does not mean that they actually live out the Christian worldview in every part of their lives. And I will give you an instance. In biology, you learned about evolution, right? Charles Darwin had proposed the theory of evolution. What was the idea? That humans came from successive mutations, genetic, evolution from apes, primates, and then humans. And then it goes further back, to the concept of, a primordial soup, right? With, very simple cells, and then began to multiply and began to change and began to adapt and all of that. Now you say, I don't believe that. Why would you say I don't believe that? Because of Genesis chapter 1, right? Genesis chapter 1 said, God said, let us make man in our own image and after our likeness. But you see, the interesting thing is that worldviews or philosophies are not only domiciled within their initial domain where they were initially brought out from. They diffuse, right? You remember osmosis and diffusion? Yes, that's exactly it. They diffuse from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. So you see what has happened. From biology, the concept of evolution has actually diffused to other parts of life. It has diffused particularly into economics. Wow, you say, wow, yes, it has diffused into economics, right? Because the idea of, evolution spoke about adaptation, and then the concept of the survival of the fittest. Yes, you remember the survival of the fittest, how that, evolution is unforgiving. And if you're not fit, you won't survive, right? So you have the pyramid, the food chain and all of that. And do you know the amazing thing is that has also been brought into the concept of economics, right? Where you have the basic definition of economics already putting forward the idea of scarcity. And so the plain definition of economics is the allocation of scarce resources to meet the unlimited wants or needs of humans, right? So the idea of scarce resources to meet unlimited wants. So when there are scarce resources and there are unlimited wants among diverse human beings, what do you think happens? Survival of the fittest. But you see, that thing you might not know is actually one of the reasons why a lot of believers actually begin to live out an economy or economic, experience that is not from heaven. There is no scarcity in heaven. There is none. There is no scarcity in heaven. Matter of fact, the Bible said that Jesus, right, he has come to restore us back to God. He has come to restore us, in other words, I'm paraphrasing now, to the life of our original design, right? All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. But Jesus has come to restore us, right, to that glory. What does that mean? It means, therefore, that we do not live with the worldview of the world. We do not live with the how do I call it, with the constraints of the world. Now we are in the world, but we are not of the world. In essence, if you choose to believe God's word and allow God's word to reframe your mind, to redeem your thoughts, to reconfigure your thinking, Romans chapter 12 verse 2, it says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may be able to what? Prove what is the good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. That exactly is where a believer is invited to rethink their worldviews, to actually be delivered from the way the world thinks. In fact, if you read Romans 12:2 in the Message, you would see something like, do not allow the world around you bring you down to its level of immaturity. Man, that's significant. Anytime I read Romans 12:2 in the Message, it strikes me so hard, because indeed that is a very clear definition of what God is after for every believer. And it is for us to actually live lives that are not conditioned by the world. So again, we'll go back to that story. The young lady said she would rather save her dog than a neighbor. Why? Because evolution had already become a stronghold in her heart, where a human and a dog do not seem to have any difference in the quality of life or in the sanctity of life. That's why you see a lot of things like abortion actually gaining ground, because people feel like, well, yeah, we came from, nothing and all of that. And it's very important to also observe that every concept, every movement, yes, I'll use the word movement because you need to pay attention to this. Every movement that has ever gained ground in this world has been built on certain philosophical underpinnings. And when I use philosophical underpinnings, basically I'm just saying that it has a coherent outlay of what they believe and why they believe what they believe. There is something coherent that people can actually think about, people can prod, people can probe, people can examine. I say, well, let me give you a very good example, right? Socialism or communism. Let's use communism as an example. Communism has persisted till today because it's a philosophy. It's a coherent argument for a certain way of living. Socialism, the same thing. In fact, if we actually go into design and stuff like that, you have the Bauhaus movement, and you have the Bauhaus movement actually came up with sets of theories and philosophies that those who practice it must actually align with. And that's why, even though Bauhaus, the original founders, are now late and stuff, yet the concept of Bauhaus still persists. Now, why is this important? I was speaking with one of God's choice servants many years ago. Not many years ago, about 2 years, 3 years ago. And then while in conversation, I said one of the basic missing things that we have right now in the church is the lack of a theology around every part of our lives. There is a theology for sports. There is a theology for finances. There is a theology for recreation. There's a theology for work. There's a theology for worship. There's a theology for praise. There's a theology for prayer. The missing piece in our lives as believers is the theology of different areas of our lives. There's a theology of parenting. There's a theology of education. There's a theology of government. Every part of human life as a guiding body of principles that can be extracted from scriptures. We should not approach scriptures only from the perspective of, okay, I approach it for my personal edification. No, you can actually there's a theology of defense and security. There's a theology for every part of life. There's a theology for entertainment. In scriptures, you can get answers, like intelligent answers. And I remember many years ago, I began to pray to God. I said, Lord, please give me an intelligent faith. I want to have a faith that is intelligent. We thank God for people like Leke Alda. We thank God for those who kind of do the hard work. We thank God for Dr. Theology. We thank God for these people that are doing the hard work of kind of like unpacking like God's word in connection with different areas of our lives. This, I tell you the truth, is the salvation we must embrace, or is salvation for us. And I'll explain what I mean. Jesus said something. He said, when a devil is cast out of a person, the devil leaves and goes into dry places and begins to seek for a place of rest or a home. And if he does not find, he actually returns and says, let me go check where I have left. And when he comes and sees that it is empty, he goes to look for 7 more wicked spirits than itself. And then they come back into that place, into that person. Now, this is not particularly about demonic possession or obsession or something like that, but I want to show you something. If you're delivered from something, and when you're delivered from that thing, you don't have God's truth that fills up that space, the enemy could go concoct other falsehoods that are more wicked than that one you've been delivered from. And then it plants those falsehoods in your heart. And most times, because the new falsehoods do not look like the old one, a lot of times people are not aware that they've actually, been put in a difficult place afresh. And that's why, somebody could leave the idea of poverty. Finally, they see that, it's not God's will for me to be poor. But then they do not have God's own idea about prosperity. They don't have the theology of prosperity. So what happens is that covetousness can come into the picture. Greed can come into the picture. Envy can come into the picture. And since they are now prosperous materially, financially, they might not know that now greed, covetousness, and all this have come into the picture. What does this mean? It means that you need to do proper audits of your belief systems. Everything about your life must not be left to chance. What is the theology of that thing? There is a theology for marriage. Yeah. Don't allow, those who just, set up mics and begin to talk, be the ones that shape how you think about marriage. There's a theology for intelligence. Yes, there's a theology for intelligence. There's a way you can know God's mind about intelligence that you don't have to go read people who will, warp your mind to understand what intelligence is. There's a theology for everything. So what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to our behaviors, how we live, how we act, how we speak, how we think, how we do things, the basic structure powering these things is our worldview. The basic structure powering these things are philosophies. You need to be able to put aside every philosophy of man and embrace the theology or God's philosophy about every part of your life. And I'm inviting you on this journey. I'm going to be unpacking this more in the next sessions. The other time we talked about, the 5 talents and exceptional ability and how that you have to lean into that. That's some theology about exceptionality. What does God say about exceptionality, exceptional ability? And so this is the core and thrust of this series I'll be doing. I want to show you what God's mind is about different aspects of life, different facets of life, particularly for those who know God has called them to do things, but then they are looking for examples around them and they can't find, or they are looking for undergirding foundations that can allow them build structures that would not collapse when the rain comes, when the flood comes, when the wind comes. Thank you for joining once again. Let me know what you think. Bye.